Hello and welcome to YPO series Ask the Expert. And today we have this enormous topic of sustainability. My name is Martin Wilderer. I have the privilege to be your host today. Personally, the topic of sustainability is really close to me. Throughout my career, I actually enjoyed working in this space, starting with sort of the clean tech angle, moved into impact investing, and more recently looking very much at decarbonizing the industry. With great excitement, I see that it moved from sort of the tree hugger perception to now really center stage, and hence excited to be able to interview somebody really exciting today. This whole thing is happening today in the context of YPO. For those of you who don't know what YPO is, it stands for the Young Presidents Organization, and it's a community of somewhat 30,000 CEOs across the globe. It's very much centered around lifelong learning and how do we make ourselves better leaders. And that's where, of course, sustainability is also these days center stage. I have myself led our network, the Sustainable Business Network, for a while. And I guess that's why the honor today comes to me. Today, I'm joined here by an amazing leader, Orlan Boston, himself a YPO member, partner with EY, ESG market leader for the Americas, and thus having not only a vast experience across your Orlan's client base, but on top of that, you're actually also heading the internal sustainability program. So you're having sort of both hats, the view on others and how do you do it on your end. And that makes it super exciting. Orlan, it's an honor to speak to you. Welcome to the show.
Right. Well, fantastic to be with you, Martin, and be with my fellow YPOers to talk about this important topic.
Indeed. Now, before we get started, maybe a reminder to everybody else, this is not just a conversation between Orlan and myself. Do feel free to post your questions so that we can consider them in this conversation. You have the chat box and they will be passed on to me. But now let's start with the topic, and maybe to start on a personal side. Orlan, what does sustainability mean to you? How did you get to this field? Any moment of epiphany?
Yeah, there were a few epiphanies. I'll get to those in a second. But I guess the way it came to me, it came in many different ways over the course of my career. I didn't necessarily study environmental science, in school or academically, or even necessarily civil rights and social impact issues. But historically, over the course of my career, I've been involved with many aspects of social sustainability and the governance side, and that's usually been with the firms that I've worked with, whether it was Deloitte Consulting or EY, where I've been now for the past 10 years. Working in some cases in senior DE&I leadership roles, including as a chief diversity officer at one point, but then also just working with my clients, which have historically been healthcare, life sciences, consumer companies. Although I have worked with financial services and other sectors. And while I've always had a passion for the environment and nature as an avid adventure traveler, I mean, that's a big part of who I am, because I grew up all over the world. It wasn't really until 2009 when I got the opportunity to really involve myself and immerse myself in the environmental sustainability topic in a meaningful way. And again, I hadn't studied it, but I had the opportunity. It was a pretty unique opportunity that came my way through a good friend of mine who was actually a fashion photographer. And he had, done all kinds of campaigns, fashion campaigns, underwear model campaigns, really interesting campaigns. And he decided, for his first, one of his earlier books he wanted to do was actually to be on something a bit more substantive. And he said, you know what, I would love to rebrand what an environmentalist is. And he had published coffee table books before, but he wanted his next book to be about something more substantive. He said, look, let's feature these eco warriors and their stories, and let's also capture them photographically in ways that perhaps might change that tree hugger brand and make them a bit more contemporary. And so I thought it was a really cool project, and he invited me to be part of it. And so I ended up learning about environmental sustainability from actually some of my heroes. We interviewed and featured over 55 eco warriors like Jane Goodall and Richard Branson and Ted Turner and Blake McCoskey, the founder of Tom Shoes, and a whole and Mike Bloomberg and a whole host of other environmentalists who come at it from very different angles. And what I thought was so fascinating about it, and what really piqued my interest, was that this is such a complex challenge facing the world, and there's no silver bullet. It's going to take people from very different disciplines, from different industries, from different backgrounds, whether they be CEOs, scientists, civil rights activists, artists, actors, so on and so forth. We all have play a role in attacking this. And so the book was called I Am Eco Warrior, and it's actually sitting right over here, by the way. You can get it on Amazon still. And it really covered a number of themes, including science, environmental science, business politics, clean technology, social impact, entrepreneurship, leadership, and innovation. And that's really what got me excited about the environmental space. So it was really over the course of this project that I got enveloped in it. Now, you asked me about epiphanies. Well, I had a couple of epiphanies doing that project, and one came when I got to interview Doug Tompkins and Christina Tompkins. And you probably recognize Doug. He was a co-founder of North Face and sold that company, and then he started Esprit, and that was sort of his big ticket. He sold that company and then decided, what, I want to get out of corporate America and really dive into what his passion was. And so he became one of the most prolific land philanthropists and conservationists in the world. But one of the things that he said to me when I got to spend the weekend with him, he said, listen, economic theory is quite flawed in many ways, because we believe that there's a possibility for infinite growth, yet there are limited, scarce natural resources. And those natural resources are needed to fuel that growth. And it was really the first time I had heard that, because I didn't hear that in business school. And so that was sort of one epiphany for me. And then I'd say the second one was when I got to spend some time with Richard Branson out at Necker Island. And this was back in 2009. And he talked about how he was really trying to solve big issues through the carbon war room. And he said, one of the issues that we're trying to solve is how do you come up with a technology at scale that can extract carbon out of the atmosphere? I'd never heard of that idea. And so the epiphany for me in talking to Richard was business is really going to play an important role in solving this equation, and business leaders will.
Absolutely. And I don't know, it came a little bit through your stories that there's actually something super rewarding in working in this space. We all have our ups and downs, and some days are happier than others, but if you know why you're doing it, then the unhappy days actually make it worthwhile.
That's right. Look, having that purpose that fuels your passion, critical in this space.
Enormous. Now, sustainability is a huge field, and we had a lot of kind of roads around it. It started, I think, with EHS, then CSR, ESG, sustainability, positive impact. We've already used a few of those. What are we talking about today?
Look, there are a lot of terms out there, and not everyone uses these terms consistently. In fact, in different parts of the world, they can mean different things. For purposes of this conversation and how we define ESG and sustainability UI, we use those interchangeably. So that's how we define it. But look, we recognize different companies. Sustainability means one thing, ESG means another. Different parts of the world, like Europe, sustainability probably means more environmental sustainability versus social sustainability, and then governance as we think about ESG. But I think at the end of the day, many companies start with, especially corporations, public corporations, start with thinking about it in terms of reporting, basically non-financial reporting and disclosures. But in our experience, what I think is almost always happens is that you start there, but then it becomes a catalyst for rethinking your strategic priorities, how you run your business processes, and what your risks and opportunities are. And I think different companies and leaders are at different stages of maturity in this space. But I think at the end of the day, it can't be, you can't just pursue sustainability for the sake of sustainability. There's got to be a value component to it, right? And it's got to be about driving value not only for you as a business leader in your company, but your most important stakeholders, right? Your employees, your customers, your suppliers, the regulators, the communities that you operate in. And that's why we tend to characterize sustainability as value-led sustainability.
That fits very much to the what we said before, the purpose, the drive. It's a journey. It's not something quick fix and then it's done and you're sustainable. No,
right.
It's and if you look in a way to the ecosystem, isn't it also always evolving? Isn't that part?
That's right.
Of the
That's right. And Martin, the other thing I would add is sustainability is really grounded in the principles of long-term value, right? Meaning taking the long-term approach versus just the quarter-to-quarter approach, which unfortunately most companies, especially publicly listed companies, have to take. It is hard to take that long-term approach. It is hard to make decisions now that will manifest themselves, a year, 5 years from now. But those are the decisions that have to be made in this context when we talk about sustainability and ESG. And sustainability at its core is really, are you going to be around as a company, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now? Frankly, is the planet going to be around, as we know it today, 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 years from now? That's what sustainability is. And that's why it's grounded in the philosophy and principles of long-term value.
And it clearly rattled the cage of the boardrooms. I mean, as I mentioned at the very beginning, it's not too long ago that we were sort of the tree huggers looked at with a sad eye and thinking, guys, poor you. Mm-hmm. And today I find it hard to find a consultant with time to support. Mega shift. I guess Larry Fink's strong advocacy to the boardrooms played a role. Greater COVID, probably Ukraine, unfortunately, needs sometimes these negative impacts. But how do you perceive sort of this change and the significance of sustainability today in corporate decision making?
Well, I think a lot of practitioners in this space have whiplash because of what's happened really in the last 18 months, where this agenda went from being handled by an EH&S or Environmental Health and Safety Department, on the third floor, of a 30-story building, to now being a boardroom CEO C-suite topic. And so how did we get there, right? And I think it's really a confluence of macro forces and societal forces that have brought us to where we are today. And those include evident climate change. I mean, we're all experiencing it in ways that we hadn't before, whether it's floods, whether it's fires on the West Coast, whether it's just radically changing temperatures. It's no longer something that's conceptual and theoretical. The world is experiencing it now. 2, the regulatory environment has changed. Regulatory requirements are coming out in markets all over the world, where mandatory reporting around climate metrics and ESG related metrics are now becoming a reality that's getting enforced. And we've seen that in Europe leading the way, and now more recently in the US with the SEC proposal, which we can talk a bit more about later. But then there's also been this shift from shareholder centricity to stakeholder capitalism. Yeah. Gone is the day, right, where the Milton Friedman model of the shareholder is king, and that's all you think about as a CEO and as a board. Now you think about a broader set of stakeholders, as I mentioned, your employees, your customers, communities, suppliers, the regulators, The planet itself, right, is a key stakeholder now in a way that it wasn't before. Of course, institutional investors are now requiring this transparency and reporting so they can make better investment decisions. Your employees and your customers are making decisions about whether or not they want to work for your company or buy your products based on your ESG and sustainability profile. And of course, in the US and in other parts of the world, racial equity, the fight for racial equity, the fight for social justice. Unfortunately, with the murder of George Floyd, I mean, that really was an inflection point in the United States. And then, look, I would say more recently, you called it, you said it, what's happening in Eastern Europe, the war in Ukraine. These global geopolitical conflicts are really amplifying a lot of the issues and weaknesses that the world and many countries face, given the dependence on oil from bad actors, bad acting nations or nation states. And so issues like war, supply chain issues, rising inflation, and oil being weaponized, I mean, these are all part of these macro forces. And so when you then add to the mix social media, other technologies, digital, that amplify these forces and these voices, it's brought us to where we are today.
Indeed, indeed, it's straight in your face. You can't really look away, and if you don't get it today, anyway, probably hopeless case. So looking at those who've gotten it, and maybe starting with this topic of reports, you mentioned it. You can't manage what you don't measure.
Yeah.
We had the sustainability reports. They were then merged with the financials to the integrated reports. Very interesting, this move of the SEC to require that, bring up the standard. One could say, well, SEC, that's just the big corporate listed companies. But I guess there is a trickle-down effect to everybody else. And it fits to this question of Ariel, who's asking, is ESG going to be a legal obligation in the US? So
yes.
How do you perceive this notion of what SEC is doing there, and what impact will it have on the sort of maybe mid and larger companies?
Yeah, well, look, if what's happening in Europe and countries where these regulations are already enacted is a bellwether for the U.S., oftentimes it is, and we saw that in March where the SEC proposed new rules requiring registrants to disclose their greenhouse gas emissions in their 10Ks, in their annual reports, and to provide other disclosures about climate-related risks. And the actual or reasonably likely material impacts on their business strategy and outlook. So no longer, what the SEC is saying is that it is fine for you to put what you want in your sustainability report. Feel free to do that, but for now, legitimate financial statements, footnotes, your 10K, your annual report, we're going to hold you accountable. That is what they're proposing. And so, what does that entail? Publicly listed companies in the US are going to have to disclose their climate related targets and goals, and how their boards of directors and management are going to oversee those climate related risks. They're also going to need to quantify certain climate related impacts in a note to their audited financial statements. Okay. Those disclosures are also going to include, in some cases, specifically for accelerated and large accelerated filers, scope 1 and scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions that would be subject to third-party assurance. And so that changes the game, right? When you are now being forced to, at least as they're proposing, to have third-party assurance, it carries more teeth. And so the timing of this is not years away. It's actually upon us. If the proposed rules get adopted, the compliance state would depend on the company's filer status, and it would be phased in, but as soon as the beginning of your fiscal year 2023. And look, the comment period closed on May 20th, so I think we're expecting to hear more information on next steps soon. But what the SEC is proposing carries some teeth, puts some teeth into this in a way that it hadn't before around transparency.
And it probably is going to trickle down to the suppliers, to the whole value chain of those corporates. So we'll see this is not just anymore nice to have. This is here legal obligation. There is some, yeah, as you say, granularity to it.
That's right, Martin. And the thing to keep in mind, look, if you're in B2B, if you're business to business, you are somebody else's scope 3. As a supplier, you are somebody else's scope 3. And so that trickle down effect is going to be real. In fact, it's already becoming real. If you're a private company, you're likely working with public companies, whether as a vendor or you're a customer, and those companies, those public companies, are going to need to get their data in order to be able to report on their emissions. And the largest set of emissions is scope 3, and so that comes from you as a supplier. And I'll give you an example. I mean, at EY, as part of our own carbon reduction ambition and our net zero strategy, we're going to be requiring 75% of our suppliers to set and define emission targets by FY25. We're a big company. We're over 325,000 employees around the world. We have many suppliers. And so we're going to expect more and more companies to do, many of our suppliers to do this. Now, we're also going to help them on this journey. We recognize that it's not easy. And so we will be enabling them with tools and resources to comply.
Yeah. Which, I mean, there's a nice question here from Mohammed asking what advice we would give newly graduate accountants. Probably get your head around carbon accounting as well, right? And the whole sustainability, not only the environmental, social side as well, governance issues. It will all be tied together, correct?
You're spot on, Martin. Like if I'm a graduating college or MBA student into the workforce, wow, this is the hottest space since digital, maybe even more so than digital was, 15, 20 years ago. And in accounting and auditing, maybe not the most exciting profession. Well, you know what? This is bringing a level of excitement that the profession hasn't seen before or hasn't seen in many, many years. And so, yes, the environmental climate related metrics are now going to, it's likely they're going to need to be audited, insured in some sort of way. I expect similar for social metrics. And then, of course, the governance. I mean, it's the governance that makes the E and the S in ESG stick. Yeah, so an exciting time to be an accountant and an auditor.
Fantastic. Now, we've spoken here a little bit more with sort of a compliance connotation right now.
Yeah.
And I wonder, are we actually missing the trick? And I'm thinking here of this topic, sustainability as a business opportunity. Uncovering inefficiencies drive actually not only efficiency, drive more profitability, also looking at business as force for good and turning the whole proposition into a business proposition. Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts in this space?
Well, first of all, when I put myself in the shoes of CEOs and senior executives, and I'm one of them, I think the biggest challenge of the decade for leaders, for senior leaders in companies, however big or small, is going to be how do you achieve market-leading growth, in your sector, while preserving or enhancing the culture of your company, and at the same time reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That's pretty complicated. It's not easy. Yeah. That is why I think that's we believe this is probably the challenge of the decade for the leadership challenge of the decade. But as you mentioned, you can't, at least in my opinion, and we believe you can't just look at this sustainability and ESG through the lens of just risk and compliance. And I think in some cases, many business leaders are missing the point. And I've had many conversations with boards and CEOs and C-suite, and I can generally put those conversations in two camps. They're either in two camps. One is they're looking at sustainability and ESG purely through the lens of, all right, another thing I got to comply with. We've got risk exposure. Let's understand those, but let's just comply with what is required and move on. The other camp is looking at this as like, okay, well, yes, of course, got to better understand my risks, related to climate, social governance. Got to comply, of course, but this is a huge opportunity from a competitive advantage perspective, from a commercial growth opportunity, from an innovation opportunity. And it's those CEOs and boards and C-suite in that second camp who I think are going to be the ultimate winners. And that's who I'm going to put my money behind. And so, but that's generally sort of what I'm seeing. Now, what I would say is that this is not too dissimilar to how many large companies approached digital transformation, 10, 15 years ago. Many of these legacy companies, large companies, were very slow to the uptake on it. And so you had much more smaller, nimbler, entrepreneurial companies really making some big leaps in their sectors and disrupting those sectors. I anticipate that is going to happen here as well, and it's already happening. I mean, if you look at the mobility sector with players like Tesla and Rivian, I mean, it's an Uber, and I mean these are all companies that weren't around just 10, 15 years ago, and they're disrupting a really important sector in this space that's going through this transformation.
I love your comparison to the digital space, and isn't there the lesson learned that it's sometimes the business models? And one which keeps on fascinating me is actually fellow YPO in Singapore with Care selling air conditioners and having the hardest time to get across their efficiency until he just swapped the business model and sold cold air. And suddenly the business went through the roof and he actually monetized on the efficiency gains and the greener angle. So it's the business model parts. Do you have a story which excites you? Just different way of looking at a business.
Well, I mean, look, there are a couple of things that do excite me. That I've had the privilege of working with some of these leaders. These are bigger companies because those tend to be my clients. But when you look at a company, like Alphabet, and specifically, the R&D arm of Alphabet is called X Moonshot. It's called X Moonshot Factory, formerly known as Google X. And they essentially were, they were the inventors of Waymo, of Verily, of Chronicle, of really all the business units that now make up Alphabet outside of Google. They essentially invented most of those, and they continue to innovate in extraordinary ways that for the tech industry, and not just for Alphabet, for the tech industry at large. But their approach to radical innovation is one that I've not seen before. I mean, they really are sort of the Bell Labs of today. But they very much have accepted that you're going to have to experiment a lot, you're going to have to fail a lot, and you're going to have to fail quickly, and you're going to have to do that in an unabashed way, in a way that's not shameful, in ways that are very difficult to do at large companies. And so in sustainability and ESG and clean tech, I mean, they're really doing some pretty interesting things there. You can go to their website, you can check those out. They tend to be quite secretive, but they have showcased some of the incredible inventions that they're experimenting with right now in ag tech and in other areas. And so that model is a fascinating one. I would turn folks to. And then a more traditional company that I've worked with, Johnson & Johnson, because my background's in healthcare and life sciences, and I had the privilege of running that global relationship for EY for 7 years. Their approach to sourcing innovation is very externally focused. Of course, they do it internally through their own R&D arm, but their J&J innovation and J Labs model is probably second to none in the healthcare life sciences industry, where they realize partnerships, venture investments, JVs, working with startups is going to give them a leg up on innovation. And I personally think that life sciences is a great industry for us, for the clean tech industry and the environmental tech industry to actually compare themselves to and learn from. If you look at what we just did, over the past 2 years, discovering a vaccine, getting it to market, distributing it for COVID in a way that we've never done before shows how quickly you can innovate and how it takes an ecosystem of players, private, public, enterprise, all coming together with a common purpose. I think we can do the same thing in sustainability and ESG to solve some of these.
I think I'd like to amplify what you're saying. I would make the hypothesis that companies actually done a really good job on getting more efficient in their scope. But for industrialization, we got so specific that we're working all in very small boxes.
Yep.
There is quite an inefficiency across the chains, and working with the ecosystem and doing it together unravels huge opportunity. So don't do it yourself. Lean out and collaborate.
Right.
Absolutely something. So what we basically try to highlight here is it's compliance. There's pressure. There is opportunity. With that comes expectation, and of course also those who sail along and maybe don't do what they commit or do as what they promise. Greenwashing is I guess the topic which I'm leading to. And that's sort of a nasty thing. On one hand, how did you, doing the real thing, differentiate yourself from a greenwasher? And how do you deal with uncovering it yourself, maybe in your supply chain?
Look, I think greenwashing is real. It is something that we all have to be mindful of and be on the lookout for. But there are ways to combat that and to be mindful of. So, look, one, as a senior leader in your company, be clear about what you intend to do versus what you are doing in this space. Okay, intentions are good signals, but they're not the same as actual progress or results. So being very clear about that. So don't position intentions, whether it be goals and commitments, as something more than that, because that's where you can get in trouble. Also, have your story. Have your story. If you don't have your story and your narrative about how you are embracing sustainability and ESG, or how you're infusing sustainability and ESG into your purpose and your mission and your strategy, it's not gonna be authentic. But worse yet, others are going to tell your story for you. You don't want that. And so have your story and tell it in a way that is grounded in your purpose and strategy. Also, understand what is material to you, to your company. What are the material risks and opportunities? And you do that through performing materiality assessment. It's really kind of step one in many cases. And then be clear about what you're going to deliver on your stated ambition, whether it be in the E pillar or the S pillar or the governance pillar. Set and define those emission targets from an environmental perspective where that makes sense. Be honest about what you know and what you don't know. So there's a lot of things that you want to do and can do to confront greenwashing. And look, finally, I mean, one other way to do that, and we talked about that, is measuring and reporting as much as you can. But also being clear about sort of where your data gaps are, because it's not easy to collect this data and then report on it. And then ultimately, third-party assurance. That is certainly one way to prevent or at least improve the odds of success of avoiding greenwashing.
Yeah, you're saying there are important aspects, and I guess that's maybe where the difference lies to a lot of, let's put it, to the digital world, the digital startups, which claim to have it all, right? And then, of course, you figure it out on the client. We're here in emotional value territory. And at least I find, if you promise more than you deliver, you're going to be ripped apart.
Oh, yeah.
Like you're putting it to differentiate ambition, what I'm not planning to do, but underline it with action. That's what I've done, and make sure that you've done what you've done.
And by the way, updating those stakeholders along the way. Because it's not enough to just declare an ambition that's 10 years out and then not progress in any sort of measurable, visible way, not update your stakeholders along the way, not have specific milestones that get you to that ambition. Because achieving those milestones are measurable progress to your stakeholders. And if you're saving all those milestones till like the year before, you're probably not going to be around to take accountability and to be held accountable. And so it's important to have those milestones along the way if you want credibility.
Which leads back to what we said at the beginning. It's a journey. It's not a one-time gig. It's a journey.
Yes.
And it beautifully leads into the next question I have is, what a transition to first having to long preach why this matters. I think we're way beyond that. But then what? Where do you start? At the E, at the S, at the G, and suddenly everything is connected and everything's sort of, and then you have to be compliant. And I mean, it could be really overwhelming.
Yes.
What's your advice? How do you break this down into a, like you say, every journey starts with the first step. What is that first step?
Look, I would say get smarter on this topic. So you don't have to have a PhD in environmental science to get smarter on this topic, or to be credible in this topic. Yes, we need those PhDs and we need those scientists. I mean, we're not going to solve this without them. But that should not be a barrier to you as a CEO, as a senior leader, to getting smarter on this topic. By the way, in the same way that you had to get smart about the topic of digital and digital transformation, again, 10, 15 years ago, if you were a company, if you were a company 10 years ago that had not embraced digital, you're probably not a company that's around today in most cases. And so I would say the same thing. So get smarter on the topic. First, educate yourself. Two, it really does start with understanding what's material to your company. There are all kinds of risks and opportunities out there, but if they're not actually material to you and material to your stakeholders, then they really shouldn't be prioritized. And so that's the second thing I would say. And then third is understand that depending on that materiality assessment and what the results will be, it will guide you on where you start. You start with the E, the S, or the G, or bits and pieces of each. Generally speaking, I would say, that materiality assessment and defining what those material risks and opportunities are have to be infused into your strategy. It should also be, it's also a time to rethink perhaps your purpose and your mission. Do you need to update that? Do you need to modify that given where you are today and where you want to be? The companies that I'm seeing, even large companies who are quite credible in this space and have a long legacy and history there, they're having to update and tweak their mission and their purpose as well to be relevant sort of going forward. So again, get smarter, do your materiality assessment, and then that's going to inform your purpose, your mission, and your strategy and the plan that you come up with.
Which probably strongly links into this execution piece and culture. I have sometimes a feeling that people, or my strong belief, people are inherently good. Of course, there are a few who are not, but the majority actually has good intentions. But then the complicated life starts and hits you, different goals, different settings. And of course, we lived through years and years processes which make you very aware how to look at cost. How to calculate carbon is maybe not so much in your genes, and what actually is a ton of carbon anyway. So how do you see this culture piece fitting into this angle, and how do you address that? Do you have to basically shut down a company and just build a new one? Is that easier, or can you work with an existing one?
You can work with an existing one. Now, look, it also depends on what industry you're in, right? Because different industries are being impacted by this in different ways. If you are, if you're heavy manufacturing intensive company, your carbon footprint is going to be bigger than, say, a professional services firm like EY or a bank or a financial services firm. If you're an oil and gas company, in some cases, it could represent, it represents a long-term existential threat and crisis for your business model, right? In terms of, how do you shift, how do you decarbonize, but also how do you transition from fossil fuels to renewables, right? That's a big fundamental shift for oil and gas companies and energy companies. So I think it's going to depend on sort of where you are. Now, the culture piece of it is key, because that's the only way you get this stuff to stick, right? I mean, you have to, all of this is a major change management and culture exercise, both within your company, but also externally, because you now have to think about a broader set of stakeholders. You got to know what's important to them, what's of value to them? And then also within, internally within your own company, what's the value to your internal stakeholders, your employees, and your customers, so on and so forth. And so, any sort of major transformation and rethinking of your business model has major cultural implications. And if you're a legacy company, been around for a very long time, existing legacy processes, systems, structures are going to need to be, revisited, because embracing new ways of working, new technologies, new behaviors. And I'll give you an example. I mean, at EY, I mean, our biggest source of emissions is our travel. I mean, we're advisors, we're accountants, consultants, and so we travel to our clients. I mean, that's how we have historically done that. We're road warriors. Well, for us to achieve our net zero ambition by 2025, we've got to reduce travel by over a third. That's significant, and that's over a third, from our pre-pandemic travel. That is going to require significant cultural change with our leaders and with our staff. And so yes, culture is a big aspect of this equation, and there's many ways you can address it, from stating your purpose, defining what that is, being clear about what your burning platform is or your change imperative is, understanding who your stakeholders are, putting the right KPIs, metrics in place, adjusting your performance management and reward system, adjusting your governance and org structures to reinforce what you're trying to get done. And then, of course, there's the learning and the training of how to operate in these new ways.
I think you're highlighting is it's not just, okay, today let's wake up in the morning and let's be sustainable. It comes with quite a change, and the change probably needs the leaders amongst us, and an awareness of the leaders here. You're really an important figure in this game, because you can't expect your staff to change the rules of the game which you've put in place.
That's correct.
In your work with your clients, what is the advice to the leaders you're giving them? How can they support the process and the change and the culture change that the companies have to go through?
Well, look, I think as leaders, you got to be a role model. So you've got to role model these desired behaviors. At EY, our chairman and CEO, Carmine DeCivio, I mean, he walks the talk. I mean, he is talking about how this is a core part of our purpose, our mission, our strategy, and how we at EY are really achieving our own carbon reduction ambitions over the next few years. And so leadership's got to role model it. And then they also have to create the right conditions for their employees to be successful, and to learn and to ask questions and to challenge the old ways of working. And then I would also say to create an environment where, wow, can you crowdsource innovation in this space? Great ideas. I mean, this is a topic that couldn't be more prominent for the new generation, for millennials, and for Gen Y and Gen Z. They're expecting to be part of the solution. They want to contribute. And so how do you unleash that innovation, those creative ideas, as a leader from your younger generation employees and staff?
So leaders be leaders. Fantastic. Now, in this journey, you're obviously not only having the internal perspective of your own program, but also seeing a lot of clients. Where do you see them get stuck? And obviously, what's then a good measure to unstuck yourself in this vast endeavor?
Well, look, I think there's some do's and some don'ts that are pretty common that we're seeing for that folks on who are on this webcast should think about. So one is identify and involve your key internal stakeholders early. It's important to build buy-in, but it's also important because they also bring organizational expertise that are going to be needed to refine plans and priorities going forward. So involving and engaging your key stakeholders, both internal and external, really important. So do that. Do ensure that your sustainability plans and goals align with a greater organizational purpose and culture. If they're antithetical to your purpose and your culture, there's going to be a clash, and it's not going to come across as authentic. And something's going to have to give, and something's going to have to change. You're going to have to acknowledge that. And so, sustainability programs that feel out of sync with an organization's priorities tend to falter. Do set clear goals and have a strategy in place for measuring progress. Do communicate early and often about the what, the why, and the how you're going about doing this. And then also, if you're a bigger company, do engage middle management, because the board, the C-suite, or senior leadership can espouse what the goals and ambitions are, but the linchpin tend to be middle managers. That's where the rubber meets the road. And so engaging them on this journey is really, really important. And then if you don't, don't look at sustainability and ESG as simply a compliance exercise. We hammered that point away, Martin, early on. Don't assume that all the data you're going to need to report exists or is easily accessible. It's probably not. Don't underestimate the inertia associated with the status quo or business as usual. It is hard to change. It is hard to change existing systems, processes, and structures, especially when those legacy businesses are actually doing well. But long term they're going to be diminished. But it's just hard to get folks to flex from that. And then look, finally, don't get discouraged. Many innovation programs are painful. They're hard. They're challenging. And sustainability programs aren't any different. And you're not going to get it right at first always. So don't get discouraged. Don't get frustrated. Stick with it.
And I guess the way you're describing that, and I'm speaking to a number of sustainability managers, it's hard. You can feel very easily alone in this whole world, and just be aware it's normal.
Yes,
it's okay. You're not on the wrong path. And what I hear you focus on is very much this purpose and passion that helps to get energy flowing. If materiality analysis, you can take it very structured and mathematical, but if your heart isn't with it, probably it's very hard to wake up in the morning. But if you really believe in the topic and it matters to you, it's much easier to get other people excited.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that's what's so special about sustainability and ESG, and why I think it's a phenomenon is who doesn't want our planet to be sustainable? Who doesn't want the human race to be sustainable? Who doesn't want a beautiful planet for our kids and our grandkids? I mean, we all want that. And so I think it's a common passion that perhaps other major business issues have lacked in the past, but this one I think makes it special.
And now you have permission to do it. You're not a tree hugger anymore, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right. Tree huggers are now in the C-suite. They may look a little differently. The tent has gotten bigger. We've embraced more folks in different forms and profiles, but it's still an important tent to be a part of.
Fantastic. Maybe on the theme, you're not alone out there. YPO, we do this very well, to learn from each other, with each other, give perspective. We have this wonderful partnership with B-Lab, which has a lot of structures and portfolios. Of course, we don't want to influence anybody whether they go for the certification or not, but there's a lot to learn with each other. EY, I think you're having quite a bit of material, which you're also freely giving away.
Yeah,
but what would be your advice or a little bit of hinters? Where can people find hacks, support, and this idea? You said, educate yourself. Any tips and tricks?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of resources. So I'm gonna point you to two specific EY websites. One is ey.com/sustainability. There's a lot of resources there, a lot of free resources, a lot of thought leadership that is both industry agnostic, but also specific to industries and sectors. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. The second website is really targeted towards entrepreneurs, small, medium enterprises, private businesses, and their owners. And that's our EY private practice. And that you can find a lot of thought leadership reports, surveys, and resources at ey.com/private. So for this audience, I would say those would be the two sites to check out.
So look out there, and appreciate you also offering this. I guess one part of your journey has also been influenced a little bit by YPO.
Yes.
I certainly hugely benefited from just seeing other leaders perform, and totally raised my sky as being the limit. What's sort of your main benefit or takeaway?
Well, look, there are a few. I've only been a YPO member for a year, and just even in that year, the influence has been fantastic. Really, really strong influence. But one, obviously, the experiences are unique. The network that you tap into, the infrastructure that is in place to help unleash resources that you normally would not have if you were not part of this incredible network. The learning. Forums like what you provide, Martin, and our YPO learning teams provide, the business opportunities, and then probably more importantly, the friendships. There are friendships here that we built just in the past year that will endure many, hopefully for the rest of my life.
Brilliant. And I guess the reason why I'm asking this and also tying this together is back to this theme. You're not alone there. It's a journey. It's not just a step. It's sometimes a heavy lift because everything gets suddenly so complex and difficult. But you're not alone out there. Start with your purpose. Follow your heart, which just releases that extra energy. And think of this as a huge opportunity. And as a leader, of course, you're the role model. Start with yourself. That's a little bit the takeaways I'm having here. What are your sort of closing comments?
Look, yeah, we touched on a lot of these, but I think it's repetition is a good thing. What I'd like to leave this audience with is, one, don't be overwhelmed and discouraged. Yes, it's the biggest challenge facing the world and the human race, but we can break it down in pieces and attack it in different ways. So don't be overwhelmed and discouraged. Recognize that this space is fluid and it's evolving, and because of that, there is time for you to learn and engage in this space. The playbook hasn't been written. You also don't have to do this alone, as you mentioned, Martin. There are resources and advisors that are available to you. And then look, again, understand what's material to you. What's material to you and your company may be different to another company. And so doing that materiality assessment analysis is really important to understanding what's material and what you're going to prioritize. Putting together your purpose and sustainability and ESG strategy and plan, important. And then finally, putting together your story and telling it to your stakeholders, and not leaving it to others to tell for you.
Brilliant. Orlan, thank you very much for this insight.
My pleasure.
I do hope it satisfies the questions and curiosities of our audience. It's, as you said, it's an ongoing conversation. It's the playbook's not written, and we don't have time to wait until it's written. So be part of it. If you enjoyed this episode, let us know what other topics are of interest. We're doing these on all variety of aspects along the Leadership Challenge. Follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, wherever. And yeah, spread the word. My name is Martin Wilderer. Thanks for joining YPO Presents The Experts. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.